Be confident, be bold, be authentic, but don't forget to take action. This is Ordinary to Badass, where our stories empower women to step into the spotlight of their own lives and pursue what they're truly passionate about. It's time to step into the arena and become more than just extraordinary. It's time to become a badass with your host, Marie Sonneman.
Welcome to Ordinary to Badass, episode number 116. In this episode, it's going to be a flashback episode where we hear again from Sarah Robinson, and she is an author and blogger. Her book just recently came out, I Love Jesus, But I Want to Die, Finding Hope in the Darkness of Depression. If you haven't checked out the book, I definitely recommend it. I'm going to give you a sneak peek of the book, read a couple little parts from the book at the very end of this episode. If you've ever struggled with depression or know somebody that has, I think this book is super important. So in this episode, we talk about mental health, self-care, and counseling. So stay tuned for that. I know that you're not going to want to miss it. She has so many great nuggets and she's very vulnerable and shares her story. And if you're loving this episode as much as I do, then definitely I would be super grateful if you headed on over to iTunes and left a 5-star rating and review. And then, of course, screenshot it and send it to me on Instagram at Ordinary to Badass. And if leaving a rating or review is not your thing, I would be grateful if you just forwarded it to a friend. Send it to somebody else who you think needs this episode or would gain value from this show. I want other people, other badasses, just like you, to find the Ordinary to Badass podcast. All right, let's get to it. Welcome to Ordinary to Badass. Whether you're ordinary or badass, I'm glad you're here. Today's guest is Sarah Robinson. Sarah, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Marie. I'm so happy to be here.
First off, before we go any further, I've got to ask you, do you consider yourself to be ordinary or badass?
Can I say both?
Yeah, explain.
Yeah, I feel like a very ordinary person. I think all of us have that kind of inner badass in there somewhere. And we're also very normal and very ordinary. So I think that sometimes I, get so focused on like my ordinariness or my regularness that I forget like that there's greater stuff inside of me. But then also I think sometimes it's a good reminder that it's like, oh, like everybody's just really normal. Like no matter how famous or well-known they are, they're just a normal person. So yeah, a little bit of both.
So what do you do to tap into your badassness? I think you're a badass.
Oh, thank you. I think the biggest thing for me has been getting in touch with the things that I've struggled with. And ever since, I would say I was probably in high school, maybe college age, I've always had this passion to kind of make other people's paths easier than mine has been. I've dealt with a lot of mental health issues. I've dealt with a lot of relational issues, and I was involved in ministry as a youth pastor at the church. And there were just all of these different things that I did in my life that just weren't easy. I mean, life's not easy, but they didn't happen and look the way that I expected them to, or that I'd kind of been taught that they should. And so I've always had this passion to, whatever it is, to just help other people's paths and journeys be a little easier than mine, to kind of say the things that I wish someone had said to me. And I think honestly, that has been the source of my greatest impact, just really kind of leaning into my own places of brokenness and my own places of insufficiency and not enoughness, and sharing what I've learned out of that.
So is it through helping others then that you feel like a badass?
Yeah, I would say for sure. I think that, um, you know, I don't believe that like everything happens for a reason in the sense of like there's some divine being like God or someone who's like, you know what, like you really need to learn some patience. I'm going to put you through a hard time. I don't believe in a God like that. But I do believe that we can assign purpose to our pain. And the best way to do that is to help other people.
So I totally want to dive into that in a little bit, assigning purpose to your pain, but can you tell us a little bit about you first?
Yeah, I live in Nashville, Tennessee with my wonderful photographer husband. I am a writer and a speaker. I love anything and everything creative. I'm currently doing the Inktober challenge and doing some drawings around mental health. And yeah, what else
Okay,
do you want to know?
I've got to tell you, I've seen your drawings on social media and I love them. So
Thank you so
impressed.
much. That's actually been an area I know, like, you talk a lot about confidence on this podcast. That's been an area that's been really scary for me because I wanted to study art in high school and college, and I did a little bit. I took some art classes, but I stopped college after my associate's degree and never went back. And so I felt like I didn't really learn the way I wanted to. I didn't get the art education. And then my sister, who's had way more practice, and so her drawings are just way better than mine, was like, let's do this project together. So yeah, it's been a big stretch for me. I'm not doing it every day. For those who don't know, Inktober is a challenge in the month of October where you draw something, ideally just with ink, and publish it somewhere every day. So I've probably done like 4 or 5 posts so far, but yeah, it's a cool way to kind of stretch some creative muscle and some confidence, and then also kind of share some things that I've learned and hopefully help some people as well.
So is that like a Facebook challenge or what is that?
It's just a social media challenge in general. Some people post on Facebook, some people post on Instagram. I've put it up both places. There's probably like Reddit channels, subreddits, I guess they're called, and all of that. There's tons of places online that people post it.
Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about your blogging journey. Can you tell us how long you've been blogging and what it's about that you do talk about?
Sure. Well, my current blog, I started 4.5, 5 years ago, something like that. I have blogged on and off for about 12 or 13 years, but I always had this tension of like, I want to write these things to help people, but I'm scared to tell my story. So I'd like make them private, or like I'd make them public, but then not tell anyone about it, so no one ever read them. But 4.5, 5 years ago or so, I just kind of decided like, hey, it's time to invest in this. So I started writing, not really sure what I was going to write about. I called my site Beautiful Between, thinking that I would just talk about when we're stuck between in that tension between like where we are and where we want to be. Like I call it the now and the not yet. And at that point I was single. I'd moved to a new city, was starting a new job, had all these dreams, and life wasn't looking the way I thought it would. But I really believed that you could still have a good and beautiful life right in the middle of your mess. And so I started, just kind of sharing stories about my life and what I was learning. And then bit by bit, I started kind of letting out little pieces of my own mental health journey, particularly as it has intersected with faith. And that started to gain some traction. I started to kind of build some community around that. But it was a very slow growing process until in the summer of 2018, just after Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain had both died by suicide, I wrote an article about suicide and what it's like to be a Christian who has struggled with depression and mental illness so severe that legitimately seems like the only option. And I thought a few more people would read it than usual, but it reached a lot of people. And so that obviously became it was like a spotlight saying like, this is such a big need and people connect with the way that you talk about it. This is something you should do more of. So since then, I've really put probably the majority of my energy on talking about the intersection of faith and mental health.
So have you struggled with faith and mental health, and kind of what's the struggle?
Yeah, absolutely. So I still consider myself a Christian. I would say my theology's shifted quite a bit from where I was, but when I became a Christian in high school, I didn't know that the things I was experiencing were depression and anxiety, and PTSD and things like that. I didn't know that these like crushing feelings I felt inside of me and the way my body physically felt painful and the way my heart would rattle like a jackhammer, that there was actually a cause to that. I thought I was just bad. I thought I was a bad person. I thought I was selfish, because in my church, the kind of church community I came to faith in, there wasn't really room for mental illness being a legitimate physiological issue. It was more of like a lack of faith, a lack of prayer, selfishness. I was told by one person, like, don't say anything. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And, I just kind of learned that there was this sort of pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of faith that, as I've grown and as I've studied more and learned for myself, is really inconsistent with what the Bible teaches. That's not really a biblical faith. And so for a long time, there was this tension of like, I'm struggling with these things, but no matter how much I pray, no matter how hard I work, no matter how I serve, read my Bible, do all the right things, be a good person, take care of everybody else, it's not going away. And even when I was actively suicidal, I didn't know that it was legitimately depression. And it wasn't until I had a leader who's been in ministry for decades look at me and say, honey, what you're dealing with is called depression and you need to get help, that I actually realized, oh, this isn't my fault. I'm not a bad person because I'm struggling with that. So that's been the struggle, just that tension of like, you're supposed to have faith and Christians are supposed to be joyful and all of this stuff. And the reality that when there's something wrong physiologically, you can't do that. You're not capable of doing that.
So you said that somebody had actually told you, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Was that in reference to like you disclosing something like about being sad or upset or something?
Yeah, I was actually just looking at that journal entry this morning. I keep all of my journals. I have like 60 of them.
I love that.
Thank you. It was during a time where I was in an active depressive episode. So there's like, just kind of general depression. And then there's what they call major depressive episodes, which is where the symptoms flare up really badly for a period of time. And I was in one of those, and, I was negative. I was absolutely negative. But part of that is because your brain can't make hope and it can't see the bright side of things. And so there was an element, I believe, of like, hey, you're being really negative, but there was also an element, even if it wasn't intended this way, of like, it's not okay to talk about those things. It's not okay to say that, you hate your life and things like that. Whereas instead of, responding that way, that should have been a sign for that person to say like, hey, something's probably going on here. This isn't like a normal, healthy response. So let's see if we need to maybe look into some help for you.
When that was said to you, how did that make you feel in the moment?
Angry. definitely angry. It made me feel deeply hurt and abandoned. It made me feel ashamed that I couldn't be better. It was from somebody who, to this day, is one of the people I love more than anything in the world. But since then, they've learned, and now they would never respond to somebody like that. They just, at that point, hadn't been exposed to this sort of stuff. And so, coming from somebody who I love deeply and respected, and looked at almost as a parental figure in some ways, it was deeply wounding. And it made me believe that if I spoke up about things that were going on in my life, people wouldn't believe me, or that they didn't care, and that people who didn't want to check up on me and ask how I was doing thought they got to make decisions about my life and like things I could talk about and not. So it was very, very hurtful.
So how did you make the decision to start talking about it?
I think I made the decision in a million little decisions along the way. So I became a youth pastor a few years after that. And, talking to youth, they'd talk to me about issues going on in their lives. And I'd be like, I can relate to that. Even before I knew, I still wasn't seeing a therapist or getting medication or anything like that. And then a little while later, I worked with a Bible college and had more people. There was more of an awareness in that place. That was where I was actually told, like, hey, honey, you deal with depression. And so when people would talk about their struggles, I would, just kind of feel this push inside of myself, like, hey, maybe it'll help them if I tell them they're not alone. And so I did, in little bits and pieces. And so I started, kind of sharing for the purpose of others. And then the next time I hit another one of those major depressive episodes, I had to decide if I was going to try and white knuckle it and suffer in silence and keep living all those old things that I'd been taught, or if I was going to take the risk and tell somebody I was struggling. And so there were a couple people in my life at that point who'd become good friends, and I'd realized they were safe people. And so I told them what I was struggling with, and was met with support like I'd never experienced before. Just, open arms, like, we're going to figure this out. If you need to rest, you can rest. If you need a break, we'll figure it all out. And I was still in ministry at that time, which is not, it's not always the response that people get when they open up about that kind of stuff. Nobody told me I had to stop serving, but also nobody told me I had to run myself ragged. They were like, let's make room in your life so that you can help the people you want to help, as long as that's still healthy for you. But you can also get the rest and the help that you need too.
So I imagine when you first started telling people about it, that it was pretty scary to speak up, or
Mm-hmm.
that you maybe before you said anything, like, you thought you would be judged.
Mm-hmm.
How did that play out, or did that play into your consideration at all?
That's a really good question. I was terrified of being judged. I remember, my heart would just pound and I'd be so scared. But I had done enough interior work that I'd begun to have a sense of self-worth and value. And I'd begun to realize, like, hey, I need help, and I'm worth getting the help that I need. And so I guess it came to the point where it was just like, I have to take this risk. And someone may not respond well, and I may be rejected, or I may be judged, but I can't afford to not take that risk, because eventually, if I keep talking to people, I'm going to find somebody who gets it and is willing to help me.
So kind of at the beginning of this interview, you said that, what makes you feel like a badass is helping other people. Was that maybe propelling you forward, or is helping others on this journey?
Yeah.
even more than yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think initially that was my main motivation for finding healing and wholeness. Thinking that like, and again, that was probably before I really had a healthy sense of myself. Just having this feeling like, man, if I could help other people, at least it would be worth it. And that got me started, but eventually getting to the point where I realized, you know what, even if it never helped anybody else, I'm still worth the work and whatever it takes to get better. That's when my healing process really took off, because then I knew I could still help people, but I wasn't putting too much pressure on myself, like in order to justify my healing. Like, oh, if you're going to do these things to take care of yourself, you have to work all that much harder to impact others. I was able to kind of take some expectations off of myself, and let helping others kind of flow a little bit more naturally out instead of out of such a place of striving.
So how do you practice self-care?
Oh, a lot of ways. I love baths and chocolate and pancakes and all those things.
All good things.
All good things. But, I think real self-care is a lot less of like bubble baths and manicures and like sweatpant days, and more parenting yourself. And by that, I mean, if you're raising a kid, any good parent wants what's best for their kid, not just in the moment and what's going to make their kid feel good, but what's going to be best in the long term. And so good self-care or good care for a child is making sure they go to bed on time, even though they're like, I want to stay up and watch SpongeBob, or like making sure they're eating a healthy and balanced diet, making sure they're not watching things that are not appropriate or healthy for them, or reading things, making sure that the relationships they're in are healthy. And all of those things are things that I think about with myself. So about a year ago, I did a trial for a month and went paleo, and was like, there's no way I'm ever going to be one of those people who's like, go gluten-free and stop eating sugar, because I love pancakes. They're seriously my favorite food. But I felt so good in that month. I quit having panic attacks, which I was having, like the kind that take people to the hospital because they think they're having a heart attack. I was having those regularly. I quit having panic attacks within a few days of when I stopped eating sugar. And I was like, shoot, I love me some pancakes and stuff, but like, it's not worth it. So, I'm very careful about what I eat, because it's changed my life and I feel so much better. I have to get out and see the sunshine, and I have to make sure I go to bed at a decent hour and get good sleep. I make sure I go to therapy even when I don't feel like it. It's like eating your spinach. It's not fun sometimes. Sometimes it's like really encouraging and you're so glad you went. And other times you're like, I feel like junk right now.
Yeah, totally.
But the long-term cumulative effects, it adds up. So
yeah,
those are
so
some ways.
I don't know about you, but like in my younger years, I thought like, oh, counseling, that's weird.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's like, I can go talk to somebody and they're not going to judge me, and I can
Right.
offload all of my stuff that I'm not going to tell everybody around me. And then,
Yeah.
It's just like a load off, kind of like you were saying.
Totally. I've been going to, so I went to 5 counselors before I found one good one. And some of them were good counselors. They just weren't the right fit for me. Some of them were not well-trained or, licensed. So, I didn't know what I was looking for. But when I finally found the one who was the right fit, that was transformative. So I went to her for about a year, and then she went on sabbatical, and I've been with my current counselor for a little over 2 years now, and I'm in a great season. My life is awesome. I'm super stable mental health wise, and I still go every single week, and it's in our budget. She does see people on a sliding scale, a a lot of counselors have sliding scale options. So if finances are an issue, there's a lot of affordable options available for counseling. But I go every week, and sometimes I just talk about my marriage, or sometimes I talk about the book I'm working on, or sometimes I talk about some mindset issues I'm running into, or, sometimes we just talk about whatever random things on my mind that week. But the work and having someone who's not going to tell your secrets to anybody else in the whole world,
Yeah.
who's totally safe and can just reflect back to you and be like, hey, this is a really normal and human response. That's been hugely helpful for me. Just having someone who can normalize stuff and be like, yeah, with your experience, or, dealing with depression or just life in general, this is how people respond. You are not crazy.
Yeah, it's kind of easy to put ourselves in a box or think, oh, we're on this island alone, when so many other people are feeling the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk a little bit about finding your counselor?
Would
I
love
know
to.
you said that you found, or that you've been to 5, is it?
Yeah, I think the one I'm on currently is my 6th.
So I think that there's kind of a fine line between jumping counselors, or having
Yes.
one and then quitting and just being like, not for me, I'm done, and then not go.
Totally.
Can you talk about that, about finding the right counselor?
Absolutely. So early on, I did not know a dang thing about counseling. I didn't know what was appropriate and what was not. I didn't know. Also, when I first started going, this was before the days of Google reviews and stuff. So it wasn't like I could just, look online and see if people like this person or not. I also didn't understand that people can call themselves, in a lot of states, this is especially an issue for Christians, people can call themselves quote unquote biblical counselors. But there is no licensing or oversight to that. And there's also generally no training in psychology, the physiological issues of mental health, human development. So the first couple counselors I went to were not, they just weren't equipped. And so one of them I went to for 2 or 3 months, and all she wanted to talk about was personality typing systems and tell me about problems she was having with her own son. It turns out she didn't have any licensing. She wasn't a counselor. So I went to her for 2 months and was finally got up the guts. I think I was 23 at this point. I finally got up the guts to be like, hey, I don't really feel like I'm getting what I'm needing. And she was like, well, it's your fault that I can't help you. And she, just projected that back onto me. And, that was a big red flag. One I saw for a very short period of time through my doctor. I actually had an accident about 7 or 8 years ago where I was on a run and I was hit by an SUV. And just in the course of my normal checkups on that, my doctor asked me some questions that helped her figure out I was having some anxiety and trauma responses. And so they had somebody who was just on staff at the doctor's office come in and talk to me a couple times. And she was great, but it wasn't a long-term relationship. And then I had one counselor who would not show up for sessions. So those were the kind of things that I was dealing with. It wasn't like I went to one and was like, ooh, I don't like this. So when you're looking for a counselor, you want more than anything somebody that you can feel safe with and somebody who is well equipped. You want somebody who does their own therapy. If they're not talking to someone, then that's a good sign that they're not working through the challenges that come with their job. Because you could imagine the things that they hear every single day. There's a lot of weight and stress and even secondary trauma that comes with hearing about their clients' abusive situations and all of that. They need to be under some sort of oversight and be seeing someone else and talking through their stuff. You need to feel safe with them. And then, the other things are just really kind of just kind of basic stuff. One of our mutual friends had been looking for a counselor and saw someone a couple times, and she was checking her phone throughout the whole session. Like, that's a red flag.
Right.
So things like that. I personally have a commitment when I try a new counselor that I will give them, as long as there's no major red flags or inappropriate things, I'll give them 3 sessions. And if after 3 sessions, I don't feel like I can open up to them, or I feel like I'm going to be judged or something, then I'll try someone else. I think it's also really important to get recommendations, to look up reviews. And if there's some sort of technique or something you really like for people who've experienced significant trauma, something called EMDR is incredibly helpful. On Psychology Today's website, there's a place where you can look up counselors and you can filter them by your area and then also by their specialties. So including, EMDR or cognitive behavioral therapy or male or female or what their religious beliefs are. So those are some things. And then just to be willing to try a few and just being committed to the process.
So I've heard people tell me they don't want to go to counseling because they don't want to be forced to take medication. What would you say to that?
Well, counselors do not prescribe medication. And a lot of people do really well just with going to counseling. So counselors in the US usually have a master's degree. Sometimes they have a doctorate. But if it's in like psychology or social work, they're not allowed to prescribe medications because they're not medical doctors. A psychiatrist or like your family doctor would prescribe medications. So that's the first thing I would say, is that going to a counselor does not mean by any means that you need to take medication. They're going to recommend medication or anything like that. They're going to help you work on mindsets and issues in your life. That being said, I was so scared of medications. There was so much stigma around it, and I didn't try them until I was really scared. I was in a place where I was trying to do everything right, and I still wasn't getting better mental health wise. And I was scared I was going to hurt myself. And so I was like, I need to try something. And what I was really shocked to find out about medications is that they didn't make me feel happy all the time. They didn't take away my problems. What they did is they just kind of brought up my lows and stabilized me enough that I could do the work I needed to do in counseling. And actually, many people, probably the majority of people, I don't have the stats right now, so I could be wrong on it being the majority, but I believe the majority of people who are on antidepressants are only on them for a short period of time, 6 months to a year, maybe 2 years, and then never have to get on them again.
So if someone is struggling with depression, 1, how do they recognize it? And 2, what do they do from there?
So depression is a lot more complicated than we think. You think depression, like, oh, they probably feel sad, or, there's like the stereotypical, like they don't get out of bed, things like that. Those can be parts of it, but depression is incredibly physical. My chest hurts when I'm really depressed. I have a lot of headaches. Fatigue is a big thing. Irritability is huge. Kind of the medical diagnosis looks at your symptoms over a period of 2 weeks. So you generally have at least 2 weeks of a low mood, and then like fatigue, sleeping too much or too little, eating too much or too little, chest pains, headaches, things like that. If you can't get excited about anything in your life, that's a good sign you're depressed. I remember a friend asked me one time, like, what are you excited about right now? And the only word that came to mind was sleep. I was like, I need to see my doctor. The first thing I would recommend doing, if you suspect that you are dealing with depression, I would go to a doctor and get a diagnosis. They may recommend to prescribe you a medication. They'll talk to you. If it's a good doctor, they'll ask you some questions that are going to be uncomfortable to answer. They'll ask if you think about hurting yourself, or have you hurt yourself? Have you thought about hurting anyone else? Be 100% honest, because that's the only way they can help you figure out how serious is this. If you have insurance, they can actually write a prescription for therapy, and you can either find a therapist that takes your insurance or pay out of pocket and then submit the receipts to your insurance, and they'll reimburse you. And they can recommend some good counselors and therapists. So I would start with a family doctor. If you think you just want to try counseling, which I think everybody should be in counseling.
I agree.
Like, if you're a human, you've had enough stuff go on in your life that you should talk through it with a counselor.
And you could just clear out old baggage or kind of get rid of it so you don't hang on to it forever.
Oh my gosh, yes. I'd start asking around, like, hey, I've kind of been having a hard time thinking about talking to someone. Do you see a counselor? Do you know anybody who does? It seems awkward to be the person to bring that up, but I've found that when you start talking about it, other people around you feel a lot more freedom.
Yes.
And they feel like they can open up. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, like half of the people in my office have seen a counselor, or, this friend's seeing a counselor right now, but they happen to be a grief counselor, but, they can ask their therapist for recommendations. The value of someone you love and trust who is able to give you a recommendation can really shortcut that process of having to look online. That's how I found both of my counselors that have been really good, is through referrals from people who I trust, and I know that they wouldn't want to go to anybody who's crazy.
Right. And people that you're friends with or that you get along with, they probably have a similar personality as you, and you'll probably get along with the counselor too.
Yeah.
So for someone who doesn't struggle with deep depression or mental health issues, what should they know, like how they can help their friends or family that's going through it?
The first thing you should know is you don't have to have any answers at all. I think there's a lot of fear. And a lot of times we say hurtful things and the wrong things because we think we're supposed to have the answers and certainty. You don't. That's not your job. Your job is to walk with your loved one through the dark. That being said, there are some specific things you can say and specific things you can do that can be really helpful. I actually have a resource on my website. If you go to beautifulbetween.com/what-to-say, there's a 2-page resource on what to say to people who are struggling with mental health, depression, or suicidal thoughts. And it's simple things like, hey, can I call for you and help you make a doctor's appointment? Can I come over and watch a movie? I made an extra lasagna. Can I bring it over? Just like you would if somebody had a surgery, or if somebody lost a loved one, we're quick to get the meal train going then. Treat mental illness just like any other illness. Maybe they need someone to drive them to counseling or to their doctor's appointment. I actually have a friend who's a therapist now who, when he was suicidal and severely depressed, a friend of his was like, hey, I'm driving you to counseling. And that was the impetus for him getting better. And then also he eventually became a counselor and has helped other people.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, but it's way simpler than you think. Just like, I love you and I'm worried that it seems like you're not doing too well. If you think they might be having thoughts of suicide, ask them directly. Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? If they say yes, ask them, like, have you thought of how you would do it? Do you have the means? These are like not fun questions to ask. They're not fun things to say, but they can be just really good ways to kind of open up the dialogue and help the person get the help they need.
Yeah. And I'll definitely link to to your website with that resource in the show notes for the show.
Awesome. Thank you.
Let's end with a tip to empower women, and if you'll share how the audience can connect with you.
Awesome. I would say to empower you, I know we've been talking about mental health and counseling a lot. I would say that one of the most empowering things is finding out who you really are and reframing the stories that you've believed about yourself. And man, counseling really helps with that. But looking into your life and looking into areas where you felt really disempowered and really maybe oppressed or taken advantage of or powerless, and seeing the ways that your strength allowed you to survive and the ways that you learned from that lesson, or the ways you escaped a hard situation and made a better life for yourself and your family, you begin to see yourself as the overcomer that you are. And you begin to have a lot of compassion for that younger version of yourself and look at that person like your little sister. And to me, that's been so empowering, because it's like, oh, I got through that. And I wasn't like an idiot, you know.
Right.
I thought I was beating up on myself then, but there's a good future ahead for that girl. And now I have the confidence to know there's a good future ahead for this girl, even when things seem hard now.
I love that.
Thanks.
And how can we connect with you?
You can find me on my website, beautifulbetween.com. I am on Instagram and Twitter. It's a little bit hard. So my name is at Sarah, SarahJRBNSN. That's Robinson, which is my last name, without the vowels. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'll make sure to link to that. Thank you so much, Sarah. You have been a total badass, and I've enjoyed having you on the show.
Thanks so much. It's been good to be here.
And with that, we'll end our show. To all the badass women out there staying in the arena, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, own it and get after it.
Wasn't Sarah amazing? I really appreciate her vulnerability and willingness to share her story. So, as I said at the beginning of this episode, her new book, I Love Jesus, But I Want to Die, Finding Hope in the Darkness of Depression, is out now. And if you've ever struggled with depression or know somebody who has, I think this book is so valuable. She's also a Christian and kind of talks about how it wasn't accepted in the church, or just wasn't talked about maybe in the church. So this is just a little clip from her book, or a little part from her book. When I'm drowning in the darkness, aching with indescribable pain, I don't need to hear that if I just pray or read my Bible or become a better Christian, God will heal me. I need to know deep in my bones that loving Jesus doesn't cure me. I need to know that being a Christian doesn't automatically make me better, and that it's not supposed to. This may sound discouraging, but I think it's actually good news. Being a Christian doesn't guarantee we won't struggle. And then down a little bit, she says, but here's why it's good news. It means nothing is wrong with us when we struggle in the darkness. It means we haven't failed. We aren't bad Christians, and we're not lacking faith. Jesus promised we would have trials and sorrows and hard times. Whether you're religious or not, I think that it's so easy to struggle when we feel like we don't fit in, or like we're alone on this journey. For example, if you felt like you were the only Christian or the only person in your religion that was struggling, and you just needed to be a better Christian, or you just need to be a better Buddhist, or whatever your religion is, and you didn't see people around you who were doing the same thing, struggling with the same things you were. My dogs are moving around like crazy. I'm sorry. But that leads you to feel like you are alone, like nobody else is going through it, and you're just bad. You're not bad. And struggling through depression or darkness or hard times, it's never fun to go through it, but let alone if you feel like you're alone and nobody else is. So definitely, I've read this book. I recommend it if you've ever struggled with depression or hard times, or just, give it to somebody else who has and could find value from it. All right. On Thursday, I'm going to be sharing why Sarah Robinson is so badass. So make sure to check out that episode. Wherever you are, whatever you are doing, own it and get after it.
Now that you've listened to this episode of Ordinary to Badass, we want to hear from you. Go to our website, ordinarytobadass.com/podcast, and submit your own experience on how you took your life from ordinary to badass and get the chance to be on a future spotlight episode of the show. That's ordinarytobadass.com/podcast. While you're waiting for the next episode of the show, wipe off the sweat, dust off the dirt, and get back in the arena.